Hi, good evening, and welcome to the Esperanza Peace and Justice Center and the UTSA Mexico Center's event tonight on Re-envisioning UTSA Downtown Expansion for community benefit. My name is Judith Vega, and I will be your moderator this evening. And we wanted to kind of go ahead and start and go through our panel and introduce everyone. So if we can start with Jerry Gonzalez, if you can introduce yourself and then name the next person to introduce themselves.
Sure, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you all for joining us this evening. Like Lee said, my name is Jerry Gonzalez, and I'm the director of the UTSA Mexico Center, associate professor of history at UTSA as well. And I've been a San Anto resident for 10 years now. So originally from Southern California. So it's my pleasure to be here and interact with everybody, have this conversation. Next on my screen is Vanessa, so I'll pass it over to Vanessa.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. My name is Vanessa Sandoval. I am an undergraduate student at UTSA, part of the Mexican American Studies and Anthropology programs with a minor in history. And I am born and raised in San Antonio and a resident of the historic Westside district. Dr. Enriquez.
Thank you very much. My name is Roger Enriquez. I'm an associate professor in the College for Health, Community and Policy. I'm also the director of the Policy Studies Center, and effective June 1st, also the executive director of the Westside Community Partnerships. Born and raised on the West Side, graduate of the Lanier High School. Very happy to be here this evening. Thanks. And I have to pick someone. Linda.
Okay, Linda Ortega, also a resident of the near West Side since I came to San Antonio in '69. I'm with the historic West Side Residents Association and Mi Barrio No Se Vende. Thank you. Lisbeth?
Hi, my name is Lisbeth Barra. I'm a staff attorney at Texas Rio Grande Legal Aid, and I practice housing law. I was born and raised in San Antonio, grew up on the East Side, studied in my undergraduate studies and law school on the West Side. Happy to be here.
Thank you, everyone. Okay, so thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us. And like we said, this evening, what we're going to do is talk about the proposed UTSA expansion of the downtown campus and its possible effects on the near West Side neighborhood and surrounding inner city neighborhoods. We know that many times developments or redevelopments oftentimes create, gentrification in neighborhoods and create displacement as new businesses are attracted to the area and newer developments come into the area. And so at the Esperanza, we work very much with the historic West Side Neighborhood Association, and we want to preserve our cultural assets, and the greatest cultural assets that we have in the West Side are our people and the history of our people. And so we wanted to kind of start this conversation with UTSA and UTSA faculty directly, including UTSA students and community members, to talk about, what is the responsibility of a university to low-income neighborhoods? What can we envision as a different kind of relationship that communities can have with institutions, especially public institutions, and how the community can benefit. So we're gonna run through some questions. And for those of you who are watching on Facebook, please, if there are any questions that you have, you can type them in the chat and we'll answer them towards the end. So we'll go ahead and get started with our questions. So I guess the first question is, can you all talk about the history of UTSA and also the history of the downtown campus of UTSA? And also from your perspective, what has been one of the biggest issues or concerns with the proposed expansion of UTSA? and the relationship of to the community on the west side. So anyone can answer.
Who wants to begin? So normally I would spend about an hour and a half answering this question, as Vanessa can attest, hour and a half lecture at UTSA. I'll just add a couple of really quick points about this question. UTSA came into existence at exactly the moment that San Antonio becomes a majority Latino city, right? So 1969 UTSA is founded. 1970 census indicates that San Antonio is now a majority Latino city. And so the combination of these two forces is really critical for us to understand, given how UTSA evolved over the last 51 years, right? I mean, Linda was part of this history. She could probably speak to this more directly than I could. But part of the reason why UTSA came into being was an effort of grassroots activism around higher education, accessible to the San Antonio community, and particularly the Latino and working class communities of San Antonio. But where it was sited was up on the north side, and we all know where the main campus is. The downtown campus became an auxiliary campus, in part because there was a growing white collar core downtown, and there was an effort to tap into this what was seen as a future revenue generating space. So that's a very, very short, very brief intro, but please somebody else jump in and add some more context.
I mean, if it's okay, I can add a little bit to that as well. I think Jerry's exactly right. The lack of a public four-year institution in San Antonio was really sort of the impetus to get UTSA off the ground. But I think most people are aware that really since its inception, there has been what one expected and what one received were really what the community expected and what they received were really two different things. And I think it's important to sort of understand that context because it creates challenges for the present day. I've had the privilege of sort of visiting with folks as part of my work of the Westside Community Partnership. And I would say that, the seeds of distrust were really sown back in 1968 and 69. And so those things have to, everybody has to sort of, see that that's really where a lot of the climate sort of stems from. And, if that sort of needs to, it's kind of the elephant in the room, right? Now, I really have to say that the downtown campus was really an answer to the prayer of many folks in the community, right? Which comes along about 1999, right? So the downtown campus is an important part of that history. And I would say is sort of the inflection point of now building trust in the community, right? Because, I was also an undergraduate at UTSA, so I was a little bit late I was already gone, but I remember it going up. I remember the ribbon cutting. I remember all those things were going on at that, and there was so much hope for that. So I think that, understand, I think it's a great place to start, Julie, is to talk about the history. But again, I think, sort of understanding that there's a lot of history to talk about. But yes, I think all these things are very important to look at.
I can kind of jump on in. with the, I kind of wanted the history to be contextualized a little bit and talk about, as a student and as someone who grew up on the West Side, my concerns, kind of fast forwarding to today, but also still these concerns, excuse me, have been the same, for the last 51 years. And just to name a few of them, UTSA's policing, we have in the downtown area, we have SAPD, we have SAISD police, there's the Via Trans police, there's UTSA PD. There's all these, there's all this surveilling and policing going on in already in the West Side. And as a student who can speak to this, I have been thrown down by UTSA PD to the asphalt over an anxiety attack. And to me, that's concerning because you have a mostly Black and brown and Black community with a population of people who struggle with mental health issues. A lot of them undocumented and undiagnosed due to no insurance, maybe. But UTSA's officers aren't adequately trained for mental health, to deal with mental health crisis. Another one is property taxes. For San Antonio residents tuning in, there's a couple of propositions on the ballot right now that will raise property taxes. And for the West Side and for that community, that's always concerning. Yes, we believe in education, but with property taxes going up, that does displace families and who have been there for years. I'm fourth generation Tejana, first generation UTSA student. So it's taken my family 4 generations for me to get here. And I think that speaks to UTSA's empty promises and their disengagement from the West Side. I passed by the UTSA downtown campus my whole life. I never knew what it was. It could, it was just a big building downtown. It could have been the courthouse for all I knew. But there was no engagement there. Another thing is, UTSA, one thing that's a concern to me is UTSA's faculty of color retention rate. I believe that as they grow and expand, their faculty of color needs to show that in the university. They can boast about initiatives for hiring brown or Black faculty, but at the end of the day, brown and Black faculty aren't staying because it shows in their faculty retention. So as you grow in brown neighborhoods, people need to see faculty and staff that look like them, that represent them. If I believe that with faculty, if the culture of UTSA upper level admin doesn't change, that's why these Black and brown faculty are leaving. They're leaving to be appreciated and respected at not UTSA University. So again, they can start initiatives, but at the end of the day, their Black and brown faculty are leaving, and that is a big issue when it comes to students, specifically students in the West Side who you're trying to draw in. Another thing is, I think that UTSA has a different idea or definition of what community is and what community engagement looks like. I was at the community meetings for the expansion for both main and downtown campus. And the way that it was set up was there was not really a community dialogue. It was the provost and the developers giving a PowerPoint presentation, and then the crowd, the attendees were dismissed to blank oversized Post-its to write down their thoughts and ideas. And I think that the community was looking more for a dialogue and engagement to hear each other's ideas and to grow. So I think that, it starts with knowing how to approach the community, and I don't see that from UTSA. I don't want to take up too much time, but that's kind of some reasons, some concerns.
Thank you, Vanessa. Linda, did you want to share about?
Well, yeah, it's just obvious that there's a disengagement between the community and UTSA. However, that seems to be the problem with a lot of what happens on the west side. Why? I do not know. Okay, why? You know, there's so many supposedly agencies here, so many groups working, and yet, yet there's this disengagement. And I think that probably downtown UTSA, once they got in, they kind of, lost supposedly what they were supposed to do, that, engage with the community. And I think that we should also look, why is that? I mean, we just cannot really just blame UTSA. I think that the community also has a responsibility. And I think that the community, we have to engage the community. The community has to be engaged, and so that we can say, look, join us here. And look at us here. There's only how many of us here? And I see Dr. Gonzalez, and I see Dr. Enriquez, and then there was the other lady, Liliana. And I don't know how many other PhDs are there with y'all at UTSA Downtown. Are you the only ones? There's more?
You're on mute.
Yeah. And so, I think that it's obvious that UTSA has been disengaged. And there's so many things that they could have done that could have helped the community. Yes, we are experiencing gentrification, but if you could just, if UTSA had really been engaged and really helped, and really help, I don't know about, small businesses, but if they could be part and involved in improving the tax base of this area, the tax base will have a lot to do with the education, a lot to do. And we all know that the schools have a lot to do. There's a couple from this area where I live who lived here for 12 years and they moved out. Why? Because first of all, they didn't want to send the kids to the neighborhood schools. I've never had children in this neighborhood, so I don't know. I've never had children, period. But UTSA should be part of it, should really be part of getting this, upgraded our schools. So that's all I can say for now.
Okay.
I think with the disengagement, and this again with the history of the seeds of mistrust that go back years and years, but I think an example, no institution is perfect, but an example is Our Lady of the Lake. They have their Halloween, I think it's called Lake-O-Ween, and they have it every year. And I attended it a couple years ago, and that was the first time that I saw at a university like actual residents from the West Side there. And it was kind of a big event. It was really surprising to me. And there were families from the West Side, and it was brown and it was beautiful. And that's what I want to see from UTSA. I feel like they operate kind of in a vacuum and they consider communities UTSA communities, and that's where it kind of ends, and they have it doesn't extend past that. I would love to see something like that at UTSA, where you see actual residents from the surrounding neighborhood on that big building, in the big building that I didn't even know what it was when I was younger, passing by it every day.
Well, remember that bridge is also, it's a hindrance. It's a hindrance to this neighborhood and that neighborhood. That bridge needs to go. And that's part of what has kept the West Side where we're at, because of, that bridge and then all the other things around it. Unfortunately, we have been hampered because we have the bridge, we have the jail, we have all of these things against us, And yeah, it'd be nice. It would really be nice.
Okay, so I guess that kind of brings us into our next question. And this is a very general question because, you know, UTSA is not the only institution that the Westside distrusts or that has abandoned the Westside or our inner city neighborhoods. So what do you all think should be the role and responsibilities of large institutions and public institutions like universities towards low-income communities, like the ones that surround downtown? And keep in mind that, you know, a few years ago, someone did look at the data and about 1% in 2000, I think it was 2018, 1% of students at UTSA are from the West Side. And that includes UTSA Downtown and on the North Side. So what should the role of institutions be? Ms. Beth, we haven't heard from you.
Yeah. So I think a lot of what has been said is that one of the biggest issues has been a disengagement. And I think it is important to have a dialogue between the community members, the people living in the areas that are affected by the actions of large institutions like UTSA. One of the biggest concerns I see is the displacement pressures that expansion can bring upon the West Side and the community. So being responsible for that, being aware of what that can do, how that can affect all those living in the community, push them out, and not only through their development, but through the development that's going to come in because of the expansion of UTSA. Because that's what happens when there's change in one area, more change happens, gentrification occurs, and we have low-income communities that lose their homes and are pushed out to places where they don't have those support groups. So I think being aware of that and communicating with the community so that they can be more aware of that and not just, that moral obligation that's there to be responsible for the changes and consequences of actions.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with what Lizbeth just said, because I think there's no better example than just up the road on I-35 in Austin with the expansion of UT Austin and what it's done to the East Side neighborhood in Austin, Texas. So, but to be fair, there's the gentrification that's driven, and I think NACB has two very good studies on this for anyone who wants to take a look at that. The real driving force for gentrification is the Pearl and those types of developments and in those sides of town. So just to sort of do an apples to apples, but it is absolutely imperative to look at these things today, sort of behind the veil of ignorance, because we don't know when these things, you know, if you try to thread the needle too close, you just may miss out, right? So the idea is that it's important to think about those kinds of things now, right? Not 10, 15, 20 years down the road. So, you know, I don't know necessarily what institution, I'm not really talking about UTSA here, but I'm talking about all large institutions, right? Like city, county, hospital, all that. One thing that they shouldn't do, I don't know what they should do necessarily, I don't want to speak for that, but one thing they shouldn't do is treat the West Side like a dumping ground. They shouldn't dump their homeless issues on the West Side. They shouldn't dump their methadone clinics on the West Side. They shouldn't dump all the issues that you know, any large metropolitan area is going to have and not you know, take into consideration how it impacts the folks on the West Side. So and I've heard that in my discussions with folks consistently, right? Is this idea that even something like economic development is sort of presented in such a way as fait accompli, like they've already made up their mind, it's going in, that, you know, there's really nothing you guys can do about it other than just check the box and say yes. So there needs to be, you know, I always use this term probably too often, but there needs to be planning with the community, not for the community. And I think that's probably the principal role.
Yeah, and I'll agree with Lisbeth and Roger here wholeheartedly that there needs to be institutions wield significant power in communities, particularly public institutions. But UTSA is a public institution, which means that it should gather and gain much of its strength, much of its cultural capital from the communities that it exists in, right? From the folks who are already in space. So I think there's some really critical steps that UTSA and the Westside could take together here, particularly in this moment where things have shut down as a result of COVID, right? Like right now is the time to begin to think about what this relationship looks like, what this partnership looks like. Not 10 years from now, like Roger said. I think it's also incumbent upon people in institutions to represent those institutions. So one thing that I was reflecting on from a previous meeting was something that Roger had said, right? That UTSA is the people. Roger's UTSA, Vanessa's UTSA, I'm UTSA, right? We are really the representatives of that institution. And so there's a responsibility that we hold to make sure that these relationships begin and take off. So to answer Hudit's question more directly, the people in these institutions have to have a more intentional approach to what that institution intends to do.
I thinking of this, there's a phrase that I've learned is called organized people versus organized money. And most of what we're dealing with is organized money, and we need organized people, and that's the hard part, to organize the people. And once you have the people behind you, then you're going to, I don't know, some of you, maybe you, Dr. Enriquez, is your mother Julia Enriquez?
Yes, and Rodolfo.
Yeah, well, I knew them very well, okay?
Well, my mom still lives with me, so.
Yeah, well, we visited her I think 2 years ago when we were getting out the vote, and she was right on.
She's 95.
Well, she didn't look it. She didn't look it. She was real, and I think that they were with their church instrumental in changing what was when the Lutheran hospital closed, and the powers to be wanted to do something with that. And one of the things was to have a psychiatric clinic and for the jailhouse people. And so the people in the area said no. And I recall going with them, and we had to go to the hospital district, and there was a bunch of women. I was much younger then, but there was a bunch of women and nuns. And I remember walking in there, and the guards would come out with their hands on their pistols. Well, that changed. After a while, they were opening the door for us and handing us, "Do you want coffee?" And it was the fact that there was people there and that we had allies. And I think that's what we need. We need to really organize. And so that when UTSA downtown sees a mob, they'll take notice. They'll take notice. And it will not be just, I think, last time we met, we talked about other entities joining us, So to me, it's organized people, but organizing is very hard. I've been doing it for over 40 years, but it's hard, but it can be done, And so we have in the community, I don't think there's too many 95-year-old women that can talk about organizing, but I'm sure if we talk to Ms. Enriquez, she would be able to tell us some of the things that amazing. And it's also another thing that's a very like ordinary people doing extraordinary things, you know. And so that's I think that we're the right track. And you know, we're also hampered by our own supposedly politicians that we elect to you know, to help us. Sometimes they screw us, you know, and they could care less once they get into office. And right now, in our district, we have that problem with our district, you know. But there's always somebody out there, and sometimes we have to do it ourselves.
So yes, speaking of people power and the things that we can do, that leads us into our last question. But before I ask that, I also wanted to kind of mention that we've seen that, you know, gentrification and displacement is not just driven by large developments like the Pearl, but also by public monies. So on the east side of San Antonio, you know, the east side, the neighborhood directly east of downtown, was the only neighborhood in the nation to receive both the choice and the grant and the East Side Promise grants. And it funneled like millions and millions of dollars into the neighborhood. And they were public federal funds, but what they did was inadvertently created a lot of development, a lot of businesses to come in. And what we have now on the east side is possibly one of the fastest gentrifying neighborhoods in the whole country. So that was started by public funding. So we do need to be aware of that. And our last question is, what are some possible solutions or ways that we feel that the university can both improve their community, improve the relationship and trust with the community, and also provide some benefits to the community and in the West Side and in the inner city? And I know that someone has, Elizabeth also has slides. So anyone want to go ahead and answer that first?
I'll just throw some things out there. I think that UTSA needs to ask, listen, and respect. You know, again, with that community meeting that they held, if they would have just asked community leaders, Westside community leaders, would this be a respectful way to have a community dialogue? We probably would have said no, because we engage differently. So definitely ask, listen, and respect. But I would also like to see some maybe some pathways programs, you know, from Lanier to UTSA. You know, those kind of programs I think would benefit the community. Yeah, you know, I know UTSA likes a quick return on their investments, but you know, I as a community member of the West Side, I remember feeling like some type of way, like a chip on my shoulder, when I saw those 50 years of excellence banners all over the neighborhood, because it took my family a really, really, really long time for me to be at UTSA. So, you know, I think that UTSA should allocate funds to pour into the West Side with a turnaround rate of 51 years. Those are just my ideas.
Should not take that long.
They made all kinds of policy changes, you know, for COVID, and I know they can make it happen.
Yeah, so
they have to want to.
Ganas, yeah, they're important. I'll piggyback on Vanessa's point. I think the one thing that universities have in abundance is intellectual capital, right? I mean, faculty who are researching, students who are researching, and you know, I think Vanessa's point about pathways is really critical, right? If there's no possibility for students at Lanier to envision themselves going to UTSA, then there's something broken about the educational pathway in San Antonio. And I think that's something that, you know, requires an investment, perhaps economic, but mostly intellectual and con ganas, right? With the intent to ensure that there is an actual pathway to move forward. So I'll just add that.
Okay. One of the things that we have been talking about with some of the community folks that we meet with is a community benefits agreement. So I know Lisbeth was going to share some slides. Let me share my screen.
And so, yes, what is a community benefits agreement? It's a legally binding contract between community groups and a developer that requires the developer to provide specific benefits to that community in exchange for support, which can sometimes mean not publicly opposing a project. Benefits range depending on what the community needs and asks are, but they're usually there to give the voice to the community, prevent or minimize harms from development, and ensure that the community enjoys the benefits of the development. For example, seeking extra environmental safeguards, or we have some examples listed on the slides. And like Jerry said, con ganas, like one way to show that ganas is through entering into this sort of agreement with the community as a way of holding themselves accountable, and the community having that ability to hold them accountable for it as well. So a community benefits agreement, when can it be negotiated? It can be a community coalition can seek to negotiate a CBA, community benefits agreement, when a developer seeks to promote community goodwill, like UTSA has mentioned that they wish to do. It can also be done when they wish to avoid local opposition and get community support, and increase engagement and better the relationships and trust within that community. Who can negotiate this agreement? Well, community groups, churches, local religious institutions, neighborhood groups like the historic Westside Resident Association, local charity groups, and any other community organizations with that developer. So like UTSA could enter into such an agreement with the community. And it should include, like, the key ingredients for this to be a successful agreement should be that it be legally binding and enforceable by community groups, not voluntary. It shows a commitment to wanting to provide that trust and building that trust with the community. It's negotiated by local coalition of groups and community, not separate and apart from the community wants and needs. Giving the community that voice to say what's needed, what they should be aware of, and involving open and transparent process in which the public is regularly updated on changes and benefits that results in specific concrete benefits to the community.
Thank you.
Lisbeth, when you say legally binding, y'all may understand, but like, okay, what's the legality? What do you mean?
Yeah, so that's the best way to ensure that this is successful and not just something that falls through. Like, you promised this and you promised that, as is something that I've heard throughout this conversation, that promise, by it being legally binding, would assure that there's a way for communities to enforce that. And it can take many shapes. A community benefits agreement can take many shapes and forms. It could be a local policy. It could be a restrictive covenant on the land, so that, you know, there's certain benefits. It could be funding to programs. There's many ways to make it legally binding. It's just ensuring, you know, that it lasts through the ages, like a restrictive covenant would do on the land.
So we would like to mention that, you know, I think from our perspective, as a group that has met with the with the neighborhood association and UTSA Raza faculty and the Esperanza, among other groups, one of the things that we really wanted to do is, you know, it would be easy for us. There's several examples of community benefits agreements across the country, and it would, you know, we feel like we understand what the community would want, but we would want to have some kind of public process to get enough community input. But clear-cut examples of this would be, for instance, We know that 78207 has been really hit hard by COVID. It is one of the highest rates of infection and death throughout the city. We've been really hit hard by the economic fallout from COVID. So people need jobs. So one of the things we could ask in a community benefits agreement with UTSA, for example, would be to ask that they give living wage jobs to individuals from 78207. Another example would be, kind of trying to increase enrollment or give people extra points through the admission process, and an extra look at for students from 78207. Other clear-cut examples would be like having a stronger relationships with our K through 12 schools, and there's what can that look like, and how can our students in 78207 go and take part in enrichment activities for them on campus that really kind of understand their cultural context and are trauma informed and all of that. So those are just some examples. I think also food access, because food insecurity is a big issue, so having more readily available healthy food in 78207. These are all just very specific things that we could ask for. And then I just wanted to mention too, as Elizabeth mentioned, sometimes it is a policy. Oftentimes the city government and the county government are intermediaries in a CBA, and that does make it legally binding because it is attached to money and land. So, I think the county and the city did give land to UTSA and then private land as well, for that expansion. So ordinarily that expansion, maybe with a CBA in place, it would be attached to that. Is that correct, Lizette? Elizabeth, I'm sorry.
And I think there's a slide too on what examples, and some of those are what you mentioned, increasing affordable housing funding, and yeah.
Yeah, I think affordable housing too. I think the question in one of our meetings before was asked, well, how can UTSA affect affordable housing? We know that low-income students and first-generation students oftentimes have housing stability issues going to school. And I know from myself, I was homeless at one point when I was an undergraduate. And so, having that access to affordable housing for students might be another example.
That definitely involves community input and community thought.
Yes, so I guess we do have a few questions on the on Facebook. So I will go ahead and kind of go through some of the questions if that's okay, and anyone feel free to answer. Okay, so let me see. So a comment from a Westside resident: stop studying us and really bring change. So that, that's a comment. Has any group with power from UTSA group of faculty members or president's office worked together with City Council District 5?
So I did see that question. I've been sort of glancing a little bit at Facebook simultaneously, and I did see that question. And I've had a number of collaborations and even working on things currently, right? So the issues from everything from, in the Policy Studies Center, we sort of take a community asset building approach, right? And first and foremost is to retain what's already there, right? So we've worked to try to keep folks in their homes, whether that means, one of the things that we identified very early on is that, there's a big problem with fractionalized ownership. In other words, someone dies without a will and all of a sudden 6 people own the house. Nobody pays the taxes, nobody does the repairs, et cetera. So we've been working with the Mexican American Unity Council to help folks clear those things up. We identified issues with property tax. Working with Texas Housers, we found over 2,000 homes in 78207 that are likely, we're not for sure, but likely not taking advantage of all their tax exemptions. So we had begun right before COVID, actually having students knock on doors and helping folks to try to fill out that paperwork. So there's a number of things that we have collaborated, and most recently, we're working with the College of Architecture and the construction technology to try to preserve the cultural asset of the shotgun house. The shotgun house is actually, I mean, it's for another time, but could be a key part of preserving affordable housing on the West Side as well. So there's a number of different initiatives where we have collaborated. And I have to also mention Justin Rodriguez. You know, early on when we were doing this title remediation or title cleaning, we would do it, but we didn't have the money for people to record the titles. And what we found out, my students went back and found that 40% of the people that we helped never bothered to record the titles or the changes because likely they didn't have the money. We asked Commissioner Rodriguez to help and fund that, and he has. And so now folks don't pay anything. They don't pay anything for the creation of the documents. They don't pay anything for the filing of the documents. So this is, I get it. This is sort of incremental change, and what everyone wants is transformational change, right? What we want to do is completely, you know, just transform the West Side. And those things require, you know, UTSA can only go so far. I would also, as you're looking at sort of potential solutions, because I believe that's what we're doing this evening a little bit, is to look into anchor institutions. The idea of UTSA being one of others, for example, University Hospital, Christus, the city of San Antonio, HEB, Bexar County, et cetera, all these institutions together working as anchor institutions to really transform the West Side. I think those are all very viable things to look at as we sort of work together, not for, but with one another to figure out how to overcome these issues.
We also have a question about the NACB studies. Have they been of any benefit? And can you summarize them? What did they tell us?
And I feel culpable here because I did mention NACB in one of my answers, and they did a vulnerability study a while back for the city of San Antonio. It's on the city of San Antonio's website. When I get off here, I'll put a link and I'll put it in the chat. And it identified communities like Government Hill, Denver Heights, and those are the ones most at risk. And again, that's why I referenced the Pearl, because of its close proximity to those developments. But you're absolutely right. The Promise Zone and all of that was also, I mean, these things are complex. There's a number of different things. And I was just kind of thinking today, not necessarily, all the different factors.
Okay, and then we also have a question about scholarships. Do we know how many scholarships have been awarded to 78207, like Westside students? And if not, is that data that we can share?
This again, I feel somewhat compelled to answer a little bit. I don't hold me to this, but the Promise. I don't know if they're talking about Bold Promise or if they're talking about the Westside Scholarship, which basically was funded a little bit less than maybe a year ago. So that's still going on. I believe there's still efforts to fully fund that. They may have awarded something already. I'm not sure. So I can't speak to that, but we can probably look into that. But the Bold Promise has really been a tremendous success. At least the data that I've looked at has essentially maybe, and I can get those numbers, but I think I read something like $12 million when you package everything together. I'm again, don't quote me on that, but the question was 07, and that hasn't been disaggregated. At least that I'm aware of, it hasn't been disaggregated that way.
Thank you, Dr. Enriquez. And then, what will the university do to avert the displacement of people as developers come and build around the downtown campus? How will the university partner with the community so that the West Side sustains its culture, history, and identity?
I think this is where um, beginning the discussions around the CBA are really critical, right? Because like Elizabeth said, if they're legally binding, if there are provisions in there that account for displacement, that account for the availability of affordable housing, then those are the mechanisms and measures that could be taken with UTSA. Gentrification is a whole other process, right? Gentrification is a largely privately driven process, but there are some opportunities, I think, for UTSA to intervene on those with a stronger community partnership. So, you know, it's a very general answer, but I think right now is the time to define how that would happen. You know, and it requires this conversation.
Okay. Somebody else. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
I'll just very quickly say there, you know, there certainly isn't a silver bullet, a particular strategy. Each community is different, but what it takes exactly what Jerry says is to discuss, like, what are the concerns, what are the threats, you know, and then sort of figuring a way through all.
Another comment says, add a Dreamer Resource Center to the downtown campus. And can these issues be taken to the UT board members?
I agree, there should be a Dreamers Resource Center on the downtown campus. I think the Dreamers Resource Center should be better resourced on campus in general. And so I believe that my colleague Viviana Saldaña is spearheading a lot of that effort to ensure that that is funded properly. And hopefully we will see that happen. Can these issues be taken up? I think that's part of the goal of what we're doing, right? Roger, as the director of the Westside Partnerships Initiative, you know, my participation here, I think the goal ultimately is to have a much bigger conversation between the community and the university. And so this is just the beginning, I hope, of a longer and more binding conversation.
Does anyone have anything else they'd like to add?
How involved is UTSA Downtown with, let's say, Lanier High School?
Well, again, I think there's a number of different, I don't know if folks are aware, but there's actually in the planning stages, a pathway in the construction and architecture field, so that students would be able to, you know, to take some portion of their coursework actually at the UTSA downtown campus. But I think to Linda's point is, you know, that I think everyone feels kind of the same way. There are tremendous opportunities everywhere, right? For connections, for, and someone said, stop researching us. I've heard that a lot. One, I remember being at a meeting and said, you know, we've been studied to death. You know, we don't need another study. And you know, I tend to agree with that, right? In the sense that, you know, so I met with someone and they used the word extraction, that universities tend to extract from the community, right? If that's the perception, that's a bad perception. And I don't know to what extent necessarily that's UTSA's fault, but it's definitely, if the perception is there, then it has to be dealt with, right? And so the reality is we, you know, at least with the Westside Community Partnerships, we're looking to do very applied things that have an impact in the community, and not simply measuring, you know, or you know, publishing or on that, but actually having an impact. So we could do more. I mean, all of these things, I think the idea is that, yes, we've done some things, but obviously we could do more, but we UTSA can only go so far, right? We need the help of the community, and we need the help of other institutions as well. But we're okay with being first, at least from my perspective, right? I can't speak for, by the way, I don't speak for the university. I just speak for myself. So it's okay to, you know, from my perspective, from the center, or whether it's the Westside Community Partnerships, it's okay to take the lead on something. Because somebody's got to do it. You know, somebody's got to get out in front of it and try to make things happen. And that's all right. I mean, you know, but we'll definitely work. From my perspective, I'm definitely working on that.
So we have one more comment and one more question, and then we'll just end because we're coming up on the time. From a librarian's perspective, as students are now digital natives, how about connecting with public schools and developing workshops, hands-on, or internships focusing on teens and librarians putting technology to use, offering programs in technology, career and college readiness, also in innovation and entrepreneurial skills, all 21st century skills essential for success in today's economy. Like, for example, 3D model, 3D printing, knit and code, which create learning, opportunities for interest in STEAM, science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics careers. So yeah, we're getting some great ideas. And then lastly, all of these institutions have been in the Westside for years. So how are their actions different that will make a positive versus negative impact? I would just like to say what you said, Dr. Enriquez, and what Jerry has said, like, you know, being trailblazers and getting ahead of the problem would be really important and different. I don't know. Anyone else have any other comments?
Yeah, I think San Antonio in whole has the ability to be proactive rather than reactive. And starting with UTSA would be great to see. Start seeing that it's not just leaving it to the community, but that, you know, public institutions and entities and subdivisions are taking it upon themselves to start set that bar, because we need a bar set.
And I would just add that, you know, first of all, thank Esperanza Peace and Justice for creating the forum to be able to have that, and all the folks that are also on the panel. I also want to thank Linda for reminding me that I'm really just standing on the shoulders of the giants who were my dad and my mom, Rodolfo and Julia Enriquez. My dad was COPS vice president at Our Lady of Guadalupe. And so, I mean, it's in the DNA. The reality is that we're builders, we're community builders. And that's what we're interested in doing. You know, we just have to try to figure out how to get that done. So thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you for joining us. And we will be having more virtual pláticas around this subject and other subjects around development on the Westside. And please leave your, maybe leave your information in the chat if you are interested in joining us. We are building a coalition to further explore the community benefits agreement. And we would love if more people would join us. Thank you.
Okay, so we can invite others. Do you have to vet them, or they can come?
Well, we've been meeting about twice a month. So if you're interested, leave us information and we will get in touch with you either through Facebook or email about our meetings.
No, I'm asking, can we invite other community members?
Yes,
okay.
Of course.
Okay.
We need more. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Watch the debate.
Oh, no.